12 noon, so we will get started. Welcome to the Teaching and Learning Center's Professional Development Series. We meet at noon every Wednesday. You found us. Thank you so much for being here. Hi, everyone. I'm Don Saucier. I'm the Faculty Associate Director of the Teaching and Learning Center. For those of you who come to these events and come regularly, you have the opportunity to earn a professional development certificate, either as a GTA or as a faculty or staff member. And one of my colleagues has just dropped that information into the chat. If you're a faculty member and you want to contribute to this series, you also have the opportunity to do that, and you can become a TLC fellow, and that's super cool. And I think, Andy, if I'm not mistaken, you're one of our TLC fellows, so that is fantastic. Next week, I always kind of give the announcement for next week before I give the announcement for this week. Next week, we will have a workshop on how to create accessible documents from Angie Brunk from the libraries that we're looking forward to. We have lots of awesome events all year, and you can check those out on our webpage if you'd like to see what's coming up. But today, I'm super excited to introduce Dr. Andie Faber, who will be presented on Backward and Ungraded, Promoting Equity Through Assessment. Full disclosure, I'm not feeling well today, so I'm actually going to bow out and leave this in the TLC staff's capable hands, and I'll watch the recording. But that is not because I don't think the world of Dr. Faber. One of the things about the TLC Professional Development Series is it really kind of creates a community of excellent teachers. And I've been so happy to be able to meet and work with Dr. Faber in this context. And I'm so excited that she's going to share her thoughts on ungrading with you all today. So without further ado, Dr. Faber, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Don, and I hope you feel better. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. We'll see how that works. Okay, so getting there. Yes, great. Okay, perfect. Backward and Ungraded, promoting equity through assessment. So I'm very excited to be here today speaking with you all. I'm looking forward to talking about I'm talking today about some research that I have been doing in our Spanish classes in 3rd and 4th semester Spanish. So you'll notice the title, Backward and Ungraded, is because I take a backward design approach to the course, and it's an ungraded assessment approach. But I also was thinking about this like backward and in high heels that comes from this comic about Fred Astaire. You know, sure, he was great, but don't forget that Ginger Rogers did everything he did backwards and in high heels. And so I bring this up because Ginger Rogers made it look so easy, and we know that it really wasn't. And grading, you know, when you're this saying has been used a lot in our society now to kind of reflect on the ways that women have some obstacles in society in doing the same things that men do. So ungrading is also coming against some systemic issues in the way that we approach assessment, and that can be challenging, and I want to recognize that. And so at the end of today's session, you can expect to walk away with some reasons why to be suspicious of traditional grading practices, some techniques to approach assessment more equitably, and promote critical thinking and reflection with your students, and to recognize some of the inherent challenges that an ungraded approach to evaluation has in a grades-based education system, and why it might still be worth it to move in that direction. So without further ado, our agenda for today, we're going to consider some teaching and learning values, reflect on traditional grading practices, summarize the ungrading research project that I have been working on. I'm going to present some student reflections and general conclusions, and then I'm going to leave time at the end for discussion about ideas and challenges of equitable assessment practices for all of our own classes, because I recognize that we all teach very different subjects, different classes, and so what works for one course is not necessarily going to work for another. So we'll leave time for lots of discussion at the end. So how we assess students says a lot about the values that we have, and transmits those values to our students. So I want to take a minute and just reflect. I want to know, what are your values as an educator, your values in teaching, your values in learning, and what skills, knowledge, and competencies do you want your students to have and develop in your courses? So you can unmute or throw some ideas in the chat. We'll just take a few minutes here to do some brainstorming. And if you don't want to share and you just want to like keep those thoughts to yourself, you can do that as well. Empathy, excellence, and teachability. Applying psychological principles to the real world, making sure that the students know that I care about them and their learning. Develop curiosity and a desire to continue learning, empowering students. Oh, these are all fantastic. Cultivate reflection and metacognition, application and ability to communicate lessons they're taught. Fantastic. Facilitate a growth mindset. Yes. All right. So this is a good list for us to start with. I think I would agree with a lot of these. What I care about, I love inspiring curiosity. I want my students
Is she frozen or is it my internet?
I think it's Andie. Oh, it looks like she might have dropped the.
Okay, because I saw you eating and I was like, okay, I don't know if it's my internet.
Yeah, I know my campus internet goes in and out, so hopefully she's just gonna pop right back in. Oh, there we go. I think you're there. We go. Welcome back.
Yeah, my internet kind of started blinking and then it just like disappeared. I was like, oh no. I'm glad I got it back. So let me reshare. Yes, I was leaving you all in suspense. That was the goal. I just want to keep you all on pins and needles. All right, here we go. So in terms of our values, there we go. We don't want to pit students and teachers against one another. We don't want to rank students in fiercely competitive ways or measure output with little concern for the learning process. We don't want to demean student work by crudely quantifying it. We don't want to start from a place of deep suspicion of our students or assess in ways that reinforce bias against marginalized students. And so I think that just to start out with, as you're thinking about grading equitably, thinking about your values and how you want your students to interpret those values through assessment is a great place to start, right? Some issues with traditional grading systems. They tend to perpetuate systems of privilege and oppression. So students who come from a well-to-do background or have a lot of academic experience, parents who are highly educated, students who speak the dominant dialect natively, they're all going to have a leg up in the way that we traditionally grade our students. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes. I think that knocked a lot of us off. So
Oh, okay. I wasn't the only, like, that just.
yeah, no, I was booted
Yeah.
off too, and a couple
Yeah,
of us
no,
were,
I think
yes.
about half of everyone in the call was just booted
Yeah.
off, and they're slowly starting
Okay,
to
like
trickle back
basically
in.
everybody on campus, is that what
Yes,
happened?
exactly.
Okay, well, just want to keep things light and fun and spontaneous and
Well, it's
predictable.
working.
Great. All right, so I'll get back to sharing my screen. Ooh. There we go. Okay, so I was on some issues with traditional grading systems. Okay. Are you all seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know why, but now I can't see any of you, but that's okay. Just hopefully we'll keep up. I'm going to see if I can actually. 1 second. Okay. Okay. I think this will be fine. All right. Perfect. So, as I said, traditional issues with grading, or some issues with traditional grading systems, they fail to provide meaningful feedback. So I always say, like, what does an 87 mean, right? Like with 87%, that could be a really high achieving student who's just kind of bored in the class and not giving their all, or it could be a student that's never seen this content before and is working their butt off, and that's what they get. And so it's just not particularly informative to know what these grades mean. They also discourage creativity and risk-taking and undermine growth mindset. So some research on traditional grading practices, we find that grades have an undermining effect on interest and performance. Research shows 3 reliable effects when students are graded. They tend to think less deeply and avoid taking risks and lose interest in learning itself. Traditional grading systems perpetuate a single dominant standard within academia that has been built around a system of white supremacy. So those are some of the things that we see in research on traditional grading practices. Some guiding principles here, and I love hawking books and giving book recommendations. So I recommend this book, Laziness Does Not Exist. I think it's a fantastic book and is really, I think that all university professors and instructors should read it. I think that it undermines this idea of us having suspicion of students always wanting to cheat or being lazy in our classes, and really reframes it in a way of thinking about, okay, what else is going on in their lives? And that goes along with start by trusting students, right? We want to, I enter every class assuming that all of my students are hoping to get something out of the class. They want to learn, they want to prepare themselves for the future, that they have some motivation for why they're taking the class. So then some background for this project. So my research interests are in bilingualism, language acquisition, and pedagogy. So I do a lot in how do we teach language, how do learners learn, etc. In fall 2020, we started redesigning the basic Spanish language sequence. And in academic year, fall 2020, spring 2021, we'll go back in time. I had just received these books in the mail. I had bought them for myself. Ungrading, Why Rating Students Undermines Learning and What to Do Instead, and also Hacking Assessment. And I was reading through them, getting some ideas of what I could do in my classes to grade in a way that's more equitable and really takes into account where the students are and what their growth is. And then I got a phone call from my wonderful colleague and friend, Dr. Christina Bobian at Westfield State University in Massachusetts. And she said, I want to know, I know that you do research in this kind of area. what do you know about contract grading? And I said, oh, it's funny you should ask. I've been reading these books. And she said, the chair of my department wants me to look into contract grading as a possibility for our Spanish 3 and 4 classes. And I said, oh, that's really interesting. I'm also redesigning our Spanish 3 and 4 classes. And so we chatted, we got to talking, and we decided that this would make a great project if we each implemented contract grading in our 3rd and 4th semester Spanish classes to see how this could work. We did some investigation, and there's very little research on ungrading in language classes. So particularly lower level language classes. So we were like, well, I guess we're gonna be that research. So the approach that I'm going to discuss today is using backward design and ungrading practices. This is what we decided to do. I'm focusing my talk today on the 4th semester course that we're doing here at K-State now. And so just a little bit about backward design. Backward design has 3 steps. The first step is to identify desired results, or where do you want your students to end up at the end of your course. Next is to determine acceptable evidence. How do you know that they reached those goalposts? And then the 3rd step is plan learning activities. So think about what learning activities you can do leading up to those assessments to prepare students. So my desired results was that I wanted students to review and refine their language skills that they had learned in the first 3 semesters of the course, develop linguistic skills in context with specific communicative goals, and approach language development and writing as an iterative practice. So that we're really like going through trying, failing, trying again, improving, refining, modifying, rather than have it be like, oh, I have now mastered present tense, I'm done with that. So that's where I wanted my students to go. In determining acceptable evidence, I decided to have some fairly traditional essays. So I had them write a descriptive essay to focus on being able to describe, a narrative essay to be able to tell stories, an expository essay to display information, and an argumentative essay to be able to give an opinion and support it with evidence. Then that brings us to the learning activities. So for each unit, so each of these represents 1 unit. There's 4 units in the course. So for the first unit, for example, I would start by providing a model where students read descriptive texts. This one was about when they were reading about descriptive essays, they read about las cholitas escaladoras, or these women in Bolivia that climb mountains, and they wear their traditional indigenous outfits and attire. And we described persons, people, places, objects, and activities. We examined common linguistic elements of description, so present tense, copulative verbs, descriptive language, using the 5 senses, you know, sight, sound, smell, feel. And then we thought about classifying descriptions as subjective or objective, and reasons for writing a description, so that you don't write necessarily the same description for the same object for 2 different contexts. And within that, we talked about target audience as well. So then that brings us to the ungrading approach. So it's a not so new approach to assessing students. This is something that there are a number of universities that have implemented this as standard. So Hampshire College, Reed College, Evergreen State University are all a couple of institutions that have taken this as more of a institutional practice. But it still is not caught on largely. So what is ungrading? First of all, ungrading is not grading. So we still have to give our students a grade at the end of the semester. We're still evaluating them. But the idea is that we're shifting focus away from metrics and recentering attention on learning. The idea is that it raises an eyebrow at grades as a systemic practice. So there's a number of different ways that you can do this. There's not just one approach. Some options. You can do minimal grading, using scales with fewer gradations to make grading simpler, fairer, and clearer. Standards-based grading, I think, moves in this direction. Authentic assessment, having students write for real-world audiences, focusing on intrinsic motivations and drawing students into the design of assignments and assessments. You can have process letters asking students to reflect on their work and offer feedback on those reflections. Students help guide the grading of their own work. And then contract grading. Grading contracts convey expectations about what is required for each potential grade. Students work towards the grade they want to achieve, and goalposts don't unexpectedly shift. And this is the approach that we decided to take, incorporating some other ideas as well. But the idea is that you give your students right from the get-go what is expected for each grade. And also, this helps. What I really like about it is that I know from the start of the semester what each of my students is going for. So if I have a student in class who's like, I am going for a C, I'm like, great, I am not going to push you towards A work. Likewise, if I have a student who really wants to get an A, then I make sure that they're staying on track for that. So I'm not expecting A's of all my students when that's not what they're expecting of themselves. So this is directly what comes out of the syllabus for the students. Research in the field of education has found that top-down grading reduces intrinsic motivation in students, suggesting that traditional grading procedures attract students' focus to the grades themselves rather than their learning. At the same time, there's a significant body of research in second language acquisition that indicates that intrinsic motivation is crucial to successful language learning. It is for this reason that Spanish 301 will implement contract grading this semester. And that contract grading is linked to a blog post about what contract grading is to help students through it. In contract grading, students and instructors work collaboratively to determine how projects are to be evaluated, and course evaluation focuses on the process of learning over the final outcome. One of the major goals in implementing this system is to create a more equitable and transparent evaluation process. This system also takes into account the fact that language development takes time and everyone acquires it at their own pace. This doesn't mean that we throw out standards completely. It just provides more flexibility in how you achieve specific benchmarks. At the beginning of the semester, you will determine what your grade goal is for this class, options being A, B, or C. And then these are a reduced form of what each of the options are. You'll notice that I have attendance and participation on here. I recognize that this is also problematic in terms of equity. And it's something that I have been thinking about how to address in a language course where participation and interaction is really important, but also thinking about how we can be equitable to our students in different ways. So that's a little aside there. You'll notice that we don't go completely ungraded. So the daily homework assignments are still expected to have a certain standard, that you have 85% of the work done, 75% of the work done, or 65% of the work done. So that's basically what that looks like. We can talk about that more later if we want. Oops. So talking about how we evaluate the four major assessments of the course, the essays. So we start towards the end of each unit, we establish the criteria on which we want these essays to be evaluated. So students work together and discuss what makes a good descriptive essay or a good narrative essay in class before we do the in-class writing. Then for the in-class writing, they write their essays in class. They can use dictionaries and ask questions. So I often have students asking questions about, how to conjugate a verb if they're not sure about that, or if they're looking for a word, they'll look it up in the dictionary and then be like, I'm not sure if this is the one I should use. So the idea is that it's not an assessment where you have to sit down and show me exactly what you know from your head. They're allowed to ask questions, but it's seeing what they can do more or less on their own. Then we have, after the in-class writing day, the students do a day where they have a peer review based on specific criteria related to the unit. Students then revise their essays based on the feedback from their instructor and from their peers. They submit a final version and a self-evaluation about what they feel they did well on, what they could improve on, what they learned during the unit more generally. And there are two options. The standards have been met or the standards have not been met. And if standards are not met based on the standards that we discussed as a class, students have 3 days from when they receive feedback from me to revise and resubmit their essay so that it does meet standards. So end of semester survey responses. How fair do you feel this the grading was in this class? Students primarily said it was very fair or somewhat fair. A few students did say it was somewhat unfair. Nobody said it was very unfair. In terms of general comments, so I broke these down into positive, neutral, or negative, and then I realized that there were also a lot of students where a lot of comments where students said, this was good, but I would change X. That were generally positive, but I didn't feel it was fair to put them in the positive category since they were suggesting modifications. So the comments were generally positive, negative, or they suggested a modification. And now the exciting part, we can hear about what students said about this experience. So one student said, it took a weight off my shoulders. I knew that if I simply completed the work sufficiently, I would be okay. I love contract grading. It enforces you to show up and get your assignments done and gives you a rewarding grade for doing so. It was good because I had a clear path of what I needed to do to achieve the grade I wanted. I liked being told how many classes I could miss in case things came up. I like being told what exactly I needed to complete efficiently and do well. Contract grading decreased unneeded stress. It made me realize that my effort for the courses was valued. Even if I didn't understand something entirely, my grade was not reflected in my ability, which was a nice change from my high school Spanish courses. And finally, I learned that it's okay to not be perfect. So those are the more positive comments, but they're not all positive. One student says, if there's no looming final grade outside of what I signed up for, why would I go out of my way to learn beyond what I signed up for? I signed up for a lower grade, accepting my inability to learn, and I didn't do more than what was required to meet that goal. Another student says, it was a little difficult to focus on accuracy when it's mostly completion. I honestly believe that the contract grading is a bit confusing, as I believe you should receive the grade you earn. And I have a lot of comments on that, but we'll come back to that. I did not like contract grading. And while I understand the purpose of the contract grading, I am unsure how I like it in practice. Often the only things that end up actually putting a grade in our grade books is our daily participation points. It just doesn't quite sit right with me that I can complete all of this homework to the best of my abilities and have it minimally count towards my grade visually. I am sure that this is not actually what is occurring, but this is how it appears in Canvas. It's rather disheartening, and while it sucks, it is obvious that the schooling system has conditioned us to equate our fundamental growth and worth to the GPA we receive. I found that contract to make me more anxious than anything else. So there's a lot of interesting things with that last quote as well, particularly as it relates to how things appear in Canvas, that a lot of these LMSs and systems are not set up for contract grading, which can be a challenge. So in summary and in summation, the positives, it provides clarity and expectations. Quite a number of students said that they really appreciated having that clarity of expectations right from the get-go. It invites students to participate in defining goals and expectations. It allows for risk-taking, and students this semester have explicitly stated in their evaluation metrics that they want risk-taking to be evaluated positively. It directs students' attention toward feedback and reduces anxiety. The negatives is that it also produces anxiety among some students, particularly among high-achieving students who have already learned to play the game. So for those students, again, with that comment of, I believe that students should get the grade that they earn, it's interesting that this is the way that they view that, is that like, I learned how to play the game and I want to play it the way that I learned it. I don't like these new rules. I don't like this new game. And then again, LMS and other systems are not designed for this type of approach. And so you have to get a little bit creative and think differently about how to make that work with the LMS. So in terms of making assessments more equitable, I think critically about how and why you assess your students. Be explicit about course expectations from day one. Invite students to participate in defining evaluative measures. Cultivate trust among your students. Ensure that assessments support your goals for student engagement. Provide scaffolded support to guide students toward those goals, and make small incremental changes. And this is really what I recommend, is that to start going in this approach, rather than go whole hog, start with just one assessment or just one aspect of your course and start making small changes. It'll go a lot smoother than doing it all at once. I'd like to take a minute to acknowledge some important people and institutions. So this project would not have happened without the initial impetus, continuing support of, and collaboration with Dr. Christina Bobian at Westfield State University. We're also thankful for the financial support from the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages to pursue this work. And I'm immensely grateful to my colleagues here in the Department of Modern Languages and those involved in the Teaching and Learning Centers for many inspirational conversations about teaching and learning and our passion for those things. So I want to open up the floor now for some discussion and questions. So I want to think about, in what ways do your assessments promote equity? What is one change you could make to your classes to make them more equitable or move in this direction? What challenges do you see in implementing changes to assessment practices? This is something that, again, I recognize that we all teach very different classes, and that if you're teaching a lecture of 200, that you're going to have to think very differently about the way that you would assess students in an ungraded approach than someone like me who has 16 in my Spanish 4 class. And then what questions do you have? So I'd love to answer questions, and I'm going to stop sharing because I can't see anyone. Let's see. Okay. You're all back. So yeah, what questions, comments, put it in gallery mode so I can see people. What are your thoughts on ungraded, ungrading? You can put them in the chat or you can unmute yourself and speak out loud.
So you have one in the chat, just to let you know.
Thank you. Oh, I did not see that there was okay. So did everyone get the grade they signed up for? Did anyone get a higher or lower grade than their contract? Yes. So what I found surprising was that more students got a higher grade in their contract than they contracted for to begin with than the other way around. So a number of students started out being like, I think I'm going to go for a B. And then they did all the work and they did it like really, the standards are like, if you did B work on all of the things, then you get an A. And so a number of the students at the end of the course, it was like, yeah, you did all of the things, you did them well, like you did what I asked. So, so that was nice. There were a few students who contracted for a different grade and then they ended up getting a lower grade. But all of them too, like, you know, when I talk to them, you say like, okay, this is what you contracted for. You didn't actually fulfill your end of the bargain. And so then you get this lower grade. Most of them were like, okay. We've also, the first time we did this, we had the contract grade and a number of students said that they felt like they were locked in at the beginning. So instead of calling it a grade contract, we now call it your grade goal, and let them know that they can change at any point during the semester so that they're not locked in. They don't, because they're not locked in, right? They can change, like whatever they do during the semester, that's going to be the grade that they get at the end. So we did change the language on that, and that helped a lot of students feel better. This is such a great perspective on grading and has me thinking a lot. I'm curious if anyone has any idea of how to implement these ideas in a 200-person class. I also have questions on that. So we can think about that. I think, yes, I think there are ways to do that. Does anyone have ideas on how to implement something like this with a large class? You can think, put it in the chat if you want. Think about it. We'll come back to that one. Did you find students generally indicate that they want to receive an A because they think that is the answer that they should give? That's a really good question, and I should add that to my survey. I have actually been surprised. This semester, I had a lot of students indicate that they wanted to get an A, but in previous semesters, that hasn't been the case. Students have given roughly equal A's, B's, and C's as their grade goals. This semester, a lot of students want an A. I don't know if that's because last semester they did contract grading as well, and they're like, oh, this is doable, or yeah, I'm not sure, but that would be a really good question to add to my end of the semester survey. So thank you for that suggestion. What would qualify for a lower grade than what they contracted for? Yeah. So yeah, basically the idea is that the standards are not thrown out completely. It says for each thing that they have to complete the item to standards that we've decided on. So it's not just like, oh, as long as you do it, it's fine. You can do it and like do it really poorly and you'll get the credit. That's not the case. So you still have to follow specific standards. But the idea is that, you know, a lot of times with traditional grading systems, the idea is that A is for like above and beyond. And particularly with a language class, like a lot of students can't do above and beyond at certain levels. Like language learning is a process that like you cannot force it to go faster than it's going to go. And so, you know, I think having this idea that like, oh, I want to see you do above and beyond is not realistic. And again, reinforces those systems of privilege. The students that tend to be able to go above and beyond are those who have a strong academic background when they arrived. So other questions or thoughts on how to incorporate this for a 200-person class?
Andy, I have kind of a general question. So it sounded like the class that you implemented this in, they were like, it was a higher level class. Like it wasn't like an entry level kind of Spanish class. So given that a lot of times, like, you know, students coming in those 100 level classes might be coming straight from high school, very, you know, used to that traditional grading standard. Would you try this with like lower level classes and the students who don't have much experience in college at all?
That's a really good question. I think with anything that doing this approach, I would do it with, I would be open to doing it with lower level classes and with students who are fresh from high school. The important thing, and I think that this is just in general in doing something like this, is being really explicit with your expectations and with your approach. So this does take, like at the beginning of the semester, we do spend a lot of time talking about what this is, what the expectations are. And then you also have to make sure that you allow them to trust you. You give them an opportunity to trust you early in the semester. So you have to say like, I'm going to evaluate you this way. And then you have to evaluate them that way. Because if you don't do that, then you undermine all that trust and this isn't going to work. And it's the opposite of assessing for equity. And so I think that that's something that as long as you're very clear and explicit about what this is, what the expectations are. And again, I would recommend having assignments early in the semester that you can assess and show students that, no, it's really going to be okay. Like when I say that I'm just assessing you based on like your effort, that's what I'm doing, or whatever the criteria is. Let's see. I'd love to hear your thoughts about equity, not just in relation to assessment, but also in relation to other course policies. You allude to the connection between the two when you pause on the part. Yeah. So, yes, with attendance and participation, this is one that I'm very aware of the conversation going on about whether attendance or participation should be included. I think that assessment is one area where you see the most need for equity. Obviously, like in creating accessible materials for our students is also really important. Thinking about how to be flexible with our students and addressing our students' needs is really important. But I think that really assessment is where it comes down to being able to look at each individual student. And this is where I think assessment comes in, is that you're doing more about measuring each student's individual personal growth. And so measuring students against their past selves, as opposed to measuring students against other students. And so I have students that struggle more with the language, and we focus on the things that they need to focus on. And for other students, they don't have those same issues, they don't have those same problems. And so we can focus on going a little bit deeper in some other things, and they can learn things that are more at their level. And it's not going to be that this student who's ready for a little bit more then gets an A, and this student who's struggling then has to get a lower grade. So really, I think assessment is a really nice place to start these equity kind of discussions and ideas. La Barbara says, I think you would need a GTA to assist in the compilations, but I think the contract grading could work in larger classes since you can't know all of your students personally, as with a smaller seminar or studio. The contract can also include why the student is taking the class and what they want to get out of it, the class professionally or personally. And I do that. I start the semester with like, what do you want to get out of this class? And each self-assessment that they do at the end of the unit also looks at like, okay, what did you learn? What are you feeling good about? What do you think you could improve on? What is something that you could do in the next unit that would result in, better learning? Like, how are your study habits going? Asking those metacognition questions to really help students think about, okay, what am I doing? And I think that actually, La Barbara, is a way to consider incorporating this into a 200-person class, is that you don't have to actually put eyeballs on all of the students, what kind of goals they're giving themselves, but ask them to give themselves goals and think about, why are they taking this class? Also, as with anything, it really depends on what your course is. Like some courses, it's much more important that the students come away with the information because they need that to move on to the next level class. But you can think about just having it be in chunks. Like, so if you get above this score on this exam, like, that's it. Like, I'm just looking to see that you passed this bar. And you don't have to give them a grade. They don't even have to see like what the exact number is that they got. They can just see which ones they got wrong, which ones they got right, and that they passed. So that would be one option.
Well, in reference to that, Andie, I do believe that the questions that you just mentioned are important, whether it's a small class or a larger class, that students are not just taking a class because it's in their program of study to take it. And knowing more about what they expect is very, very important in either how you deliver material or what you deliver. So that's why I said, I think it could work at the larger scale if there is someone doing the sort of the quantitative piece with you.
Yeah. And I think that also asking students to think about what skills they have been developing in the class, particularly I like to ask students what skills are related to Spanish and what skills they're developing that are more broad. So, learning how to read a difficult text, or learning how to be okay with some ambiguity. That's a big challenge for students learning a new language, is that they don't understand everything that's being said to them. They have to kind of figure out from the pieces that they do understand what is going on. And that's an important thing, like being able to pull out the main idea, being able to identify social contexts. So looking at like, what are the things that you're learning in this class? What skills are you developing? What organizational skills are you developing with your homework practices? Asking students those kinds of questions can really be helpful in just letting them realize that like they're in charge, that like this course is for them, and think about what are they doing to improve themselves and their potential professional outcomes in the future.
Yeah, I think it does put the onus of learning on them, but it also says to me that if you've told them what the goals and objectives are for each assignment that you give, the question is, did they get it? Did they get that? Or did they get something beyond that, which you had not thought about yourself, that could become a goal or objective in the subsequent course that you teach? So when you go and ask your students, and we do this after each small project, instead of having them write it, I just say, let's all get together and you tell me what you've learned from this project, personally or professionally. What did you get out of it? And I'm surprised that sometimes the most obvious things aren't mentioned. But when I say something about them, they go, well, yeah, I learned that too. But they usually tell me some life learning skill that they've learned. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Dr. Lulay.
I'm going to dispense the formalities. So thank you. I absolutely love this, and it's really exciting. And I've been interested in the topic of kind of ungrading, but had I had found the time to, think about it further than that. So thank you. And so I have a very practical question. Like this is important, and kind of thinking about equity is, it needs to be done. But so that I can plan the rollout of this better, how was it in terms of the amount of time it took you? Like, what should I expect making the shift? How much was it, did it help you to be kind of more invested in a positive way? Did it give you as the instructor more stress because you felt the need to like manage everyone's expectations? Like, what was your experience?
So that's a really good question. It is, it's a lot of work on the front end in terms of planning and figuring out. I think that now that we have like implemented it, I think that it works nicely. I think that it's useful. It is what my big challenge is that every semester we're creating new rubrics for each of the assignments or each of the writing pieces, because we create a new rubric within each new class, which is like, it's so much easier to just be like on Canvas, like click and reuse the rubric from last semester. So that part is a little bit, it's not that time consuming. It's just another thing on top of all the things. Aside from that, I kind of naively thought that the grading was going to go faster because I was just saying like this meets standards or this doesn't meet standards. But this approach relies on feedback as an important thing. And so I think a lot more deeply about the feedback that I'm giving my students. And so it turns out that it doesn't really go any faster. It does save me that agony of like, oh, is this an 85 or an 89? Or like, would I put this here or here? That piece of it is a lot easier. It's also a lot easier to be like, this was like minimally sufficient here. Like, it's fine. But like I don't have that same like, oh, I'm giving them a really bad grade. It's like they have an opportunity to redo it. If they did not meet standards at all, I can say like, look, like come back, come meet with me, like revise, resubmit. So it's not like you got an F, moving on, next thing. So it invites students to come back to it. But in terms of like the logistics, I think that, yeah, you should dedicate, if you're planning on going like full ungrading. What I might recommend instead is considering just implementing like 1 or 2 assignments, trying this out on, or, starting small with just like one piece of your class You're going to say like, okay, I'm going to focus on this for this thing. And then if that goes well, you might think like, okay, maybe the next time I'll also incorporate this other thing, because then it's not, I think that the task that we took on here was a lot, and it took a lot of time to plan and implement. But we just took the courses and said, we're going to do the whole thing ungraded. So yeah, if I didn't have a partner working on this with me and financial support from an ACTFL grant, then I don't know that I would have wanted to take this on all at once. I would have done it in incremental steps. Other questions, thoughts?
I have one
Challenges?
question or I guess I have like two questions that might kind of like put an end cap to this. What do you think is the biggest barrier to instructors implementing this in any capacity, whether it's just one assignment versus the total overhaul of a given class? And then the second question is, what would you say to counteract that? Because ultimately this is a good thing. So I want to hear kind of what the biggest barrier is, and then what you would say to undo that.
So that's those are great questions. I think the biggest barrier is just the system, right? Like basically doing this in even on just one assignment, like you're swimming against the current. And so for instructors where you already have a heavy workload, you've got a lot going on, like that's an extra thing that you are having to do that you don't have to do, right? Like you don't have to move towards these equitable assessment practices. You can just give, and most of the time students aren't even going to think about it. Which is another drawback of this, is that students start thinking about their own grades and then they're like, why are we doing it this way? And you're like, why did I teach you to critically think? Ultimately, it's a good thing, but there is that piece of it, is that if you just put like a B on their assignment, they go, oh, okay, I got a B. And a lot of times they don't really think about the how or why, like they just accept it because that's what they've known and that's what's standard. So I think that that's the big thing, is that it's extra work and it's extra time. And a lot of instructors just don't want to take on more than what they're already being asked to do, because they're already being asked to do a lot. What would I say to that? I would say just try it out in something small. Like that is, small incremental approaches, like taking one assignment and thinking about how could I be a little bit more flexible with this? How could I have students reflect on their own work? I think having students grade themselves on an assignment is a great way to start this. Because then you're going through and you're basically saying like, yes, I agree. No, I don't agree. And why? And so that can be a way to kind of start giving students the rubric and then saying like, what would you give yourself? Allows expectations to be a little bit more clear and straightforward. And is a nice, it's not as much work then. You're still swimming against the current, but it's not the same. So that's what I would say to that.
So Andie, are you saying that when you grade them, you're not putting notes or explaining why the grade or the assessment is what it is? Is there teaching?
Oh no, I give copious feedback.
Okay.
I give them what I write on their sheet is that basically it meets expectations or it does not meet expectations based on the expectations that we decided on as a class. And then I write out what are the things that the student did well, what are the things that I think that they could improve on for their next version, and any other information that they need for the assignment.
So is that done digitally so that you can cut and paste and not repeat the same note, or are you writing those individually?
That would be so much better. Since my students write it in class by hand, I write all my comments back by hand.
Okay.
Which is a nice, it's nice and personal, and we have a nice little, we get a nice little relationship that way, but it is time consuming. All right. And with that, I'm mindful of people's time. So thank you all very much for having me. It was lovely to hear your thoughts and always to be in this group. I'll leave it to Noah and Ashley if they have final comments.
Yes, thank you so much, Andie. That was amazing. You gave us all so much to think about. This is awesome. I'm dropping the post-event survey link in the chat for those of you to complete if you want to work towards that certificate. Next week, we'll have Angie Brown from Library Services talking about how to create accessible documents. But until then, it was great to see everyone, and have a great rest of your week.